Previously on AgentPalmer.com, a book review of Clive Thompson's Coders, my thoughts on Sturgill Simpson's Netflix special Sound and Fury, and I'm still working on creating a Margot-approved meal. This is the Palmer Files, Episode 5 with guest Tristan Boyle, the Anarchaeologist, where we talk about modern archaeology, hidden history, and then I break his heart. Let's do the show. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this episode is a guest who was on the initial list of guests well before launch, Tristan Boyle. Now, normally I would tell you how I know Tristan, but since we actually cover that during the episode, I'm going to tell you why Tristan was chosen instead. Usually, when something's dead and buried, it's over, but for this archaeologist, it's just the start of the conversation. Tristan is passionate, he's knowledgeable, and he's not only willing to share his knowledge, he is the co-founder of a podcast network created on the idea of sharing any and all knowledge that he can find. That network is the Archaeology Podcast Network, ArchPodNet for short, and of course he's got his own show on the network, The Modern Myth with Tristan Boyle. He's also an independent researcher and a digital public archaeologist. When it came to topics for this episode, I was always going to start where we do, with modern archaeology, and from there I had faith that any of the rest of the ideas or notes I had on where the conversation might go would get thrown completely out the window, and of course, they were. As mentioned earlier, we discuss on this episode how it came to be that we fell into the same circles, plus how this episode came to be, and we diverge into Tristan's love-hate relationship with Indiana Jones and dig into some more dustier topics. I think that's enough puns for now. Before we get into the episode proper, you can hear Tristan on his show, the aforementioned Modern Myth with Tristan Boyle. And you can follow him on his Twitter at Anarchaeologist. His network is at ArchPodNet, and the website for that network is archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. You can also tweet this show at The Palmer Files, me at Agent Palmer, and of course, all of these links and all of those mentioned within the show will be located in the show notes. So, without further ado, let's get digging into the conversation. Tristan, what is modern archaeology?
Modern archaeology, I think, is going through a bit of transition because I don't think it represents what a lot of people believe it represents. There's a kind of an idea that archaeology is digging out the past, looking at it, and then showing it off. And archaeology is more than that. Without getting too technical or theoretical, I think archaeology, in my opinion, represents a kind of way of reckoning who we are. We ourselves as individuals, we have memories, we have experiences, and we rely on what's happened to us previously to figure out what we should do now and what we need to do in the future. And as a society, we also do that. We used to tell stories that had meanings. We used to try and retell things. We used to write things down. We used to have oral histories. And now we have an evolution of that, which is the kind of archaeology that you kind of see today. Now, to boil that down really massively, there are two main types of archaeology that is done today. And that's like commercial archaeology, also called salvage archaeology, and academic archaeology. Those are the two kind of main separations you'll hear people talk about.
And which one did Indiana Jones do?
He did... technically, he did colonial archaeology. And colonial archaeology is kind of like, if you can imagine, you know better than other people. You go into their country, you go into their lands, you take their items, and you tell them what it means. That's where Indiana Jones fits in.
Okay, and you got, and I say you, but like archaeology as a whole secretly hates Indy, right? Because that's what, like, on the outside, people who don't know, that's what they always think.
And do you know what? I hate Indy, but I cannot say that other people do. I have met quite a lot of archaeologists. I've been to conferences. I've spoken to them. Just generally, a lot of people took up archaeology because of Indiana Jones. It is probably one of the most important things in getting people interested in archaeology as a career. So yeah, we all recognize like how problematic Indiana Jones is, and I think there's a certain there's a certain kind of like there's something there that really captures people's imaginations. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm still on the fence, really.
Okay, so commercial and academic.
Yes, roughly.
Are they? Is it all digging in dirt?
No.
Okay.
No. So archaeology has different parts to it. I mean, the thing is, for me, I see archaeology as a very broad category. For me, it can range from your typical digging up dirt to what stuff like Dr. Andrew Rinehart does, where he actually is doing an archaeological survey of the game No Man's Sky. And he's taking that information and uploading it to a real archaeological data service for other people then to access. So for me, archaeology can encompass so much that it's difficult to really pin it down.
I guess the follow-up question, because I wanted to get into this, was what's the digital equivalent of digging in the dirt? Are we talking digging into the code, or are we talking digging into the databases that were left behind? Or is it a little bit of both? Or does it depend on what you're looking for?
All of the above. I think. Well, I'll kind of paraphrase what Andrew Rinehart has kind of said in the past. Actually, consequently, Dr. Andrew Rinehart was the guy who was the archaeologist on the project to dig up the Atari ET cartridges in the desert. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
No, I watched a documentary on it.
Yeah,
or one
Andrew
of the
Rinehart,
documentaries on it.
So he was the main archaeologist for that. And I mean, what he talks about is the archaeogaming, and that being the archaeology of and in video games. So for digital digging, there's a couple of people at the University of York who do that as well. And it's actually a really broad subgenre as well. So, for example, somebody found, I think, a hard drive or a pen drive and literally went about recovering it, checking the file directories in it, recording it as if it was an archaeological site made of mud and like dirt and stuff. And, it's about, I think archaeology is about recording, and it's about trying to get that information that otherwise would be lost if we just let people kind of like build over ancient sites. And so when it comes to digital stuff, it's about recording information in such a way that you can, even if it's erased, you can actually piece together kind of what might have been there.
I guess the other question then becomes, when you look at the time that's changed, right? So in the 1900s, archaeology literally is digging in dirt, and the quote-unquote digital equivalent for the 1900s was reading whatever texts existed. But there were only so many texts. There were only so many places to dig. In fact, that the second part of that's still true. But like now, so much is created, so much is written, and podcasts and video, and there is just so much that, 100, 200, 300, 1,000 years from now, anybody looking back is going to have so much more to sift through. Not even just noise, but just so much to sift through. Like one podcast episode is going to equal one pot. But there's going to be like 1 million pots for them to like look at in hindsight. Like, should we be, I don't know, doing a favor to those people? Like, and like finding a way to organize it now? Are we doing a good job of that, or is it just going to be a mess for them when they turn around and look back on us?
I think we should just stop making podcasts. That would help. The other thing is, I actually think we have to understand that the past itself, as it stands right now, that's a mess as well. And the thing is that there are things in the past that we will never know. There's things in the past that we will never find out. There are things in the past that are gone forever, right? And there is so much information in the past, and I think you can't treat it like that the podcasts and the books and the things that we're writing now, those are just a different form of the same information that's lost in the past. I think that in reality, what we might start doing is having more in-between records of stuff. So one of the biggest problems in the past is to kind of say, one after another, like, what kind of sequence did things happen in? Like, what's older, what's younger, and trying to piece together what happened, and then you can start asking why. So when we have this abundance of material now, we could just take a look at podcasts. You know, we have this abundance of podcasts. You know, everybody and their grandmother has one, and but every podcast has a story. You know, and I mean, for example, the Palmer Files has a story, does it not?
It does.
Let's see if we can trace that story, because let's take a look back. Because for me, my connection to you is not very apparent. We don't live on the same continent.
We don't.
We've never met in real life.
We haven't.
But how do we know each other? Let's take it back, because I started listening to Dark Angels and Pretty Freaks, which was linked on a Reddit podcast subreddit. Okay?
Okay.
Now, off the back of that, I'm pretty sure I met David and the other guys. Diamond Dave.
Yep. Okay. So and then I came into the circle somehow. I mean, I guess so at the same time or on a different like tangent. Mm-hmm. I started listening to podcasts and got to 7 Days a Geek, and 7 Days a Geek got me to Diamond Dave, which also got me to Dark Angels and Pretty Freaks. And then you and I kind of coexisted within a similar circle. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until, I think it was before Chronicles Unwritten, but like at a certain point, because of Dave, we got like together, so to speak. Yeah.
And I think, I was having a lot of strange conversations around that time as well, which I think kind of helped kind of speak to other people and get to know who I was and stuff. And I think there's, but you see, out of just the Palmer Files podcast, we've already connected all these other podcasts and their creators, and they have all offshoots. Now, let's try and think about, say we find one pot in a village from, I don't know, like, let's make it easy, 1,500 years ago. So, like 500 BC, the Romans have just left Britain. There's kind of like, this is pre-medieval times, and you've got a pot. Now, the pot has markings on it, and those markings are made by a person. That person could have had so many other connections to other people as you have had between me and you, to all these other people who've influenced them and connected them. And that information is forever lost. So that is possibly the difference between then and now. That all the information that really, tied people together and connected them is the information we're going to be missing. And maybe that's the information that we're going to be able to keep now that everything's digitally stored. That is, unless, we destroy ourselves before all that.
Well, I mean, that's true. But, I mean, I guess we can look at the history of now almost, because we were never able to connect those dots for the most part. I mean, in if you go back 50 years or before the modern digital age is what I'll call it, unless it was written in a book, you were never going to be able to see those connections. Whereas now we can, but I mean, we just went through your connection to me. How many more, I don't know, personal connections do we need to like look at in order to, I don't know, learn something? Because I don't know if a case study of one is valid, or is it?
I think what you have to realize then is that when it comes to ancient archaeology up to modern archaeology, is that sometimes you will only have one. I mean, I know about a little bit about American archaeology just through osmosis with my American kind of colleagues and compatriots. And I know that there are rules in certain states where, like, for example, a site is defined by, I don't know, like a couple of flakes. You know, they're like little stone chippings. So when somebody wants to, like, create a stone tool, you basically hit one rock off another rock, and you create these little flakes that have little sharp edges. So, you know, how many of those come together and as an archaeological site? And that changes from state to state. You know, that changes. So there's a part of archaeology which is actually talking about what you're saying, and that's about, well, what constitutes something of value to record? Because I'm sure you could understand that recording absolutely everything is A, impossible, and B, you know, you have to ask yourself why.
Well,
you know?
If you spend so much time recording it, you spend no time analyzing it. I mean, so there has to be a balance between, like, you have to be able to look at it. And, I mean, digitally, of course, like, if you stop recording something, it's better to zoom out and see a big picture and then zoom in and see all the tiny little, like, cross sections and little stories. But how is that even happening?
I think I think the internet is somewhat different than previous. Like, I think the internet allows us to do different things, and I think the advent of computers, I don't think it's. See, I like this. There's this saying. It's like, somebody's not smart, they can just say dumb things really, really quickly. And I feel like technology has not necessarily made us smarter, and that's in air quotations, but we're being able to do stuff just more quicker, you know? Because ultimately, we, from this almost like idealistic state of, oh, what ought we to be doing when it comes to what we're recording, how we're recording, and things like that, you then come up against the struggle of resources, you know? Like, why should we be spending money on this? Why should we be spending time on this, you know? And there's a lot of questions that you need to ask that ultimately come back to this almost like, well, what's the point? And a lot of archaeologists talk about this. It is a very talked about thing, but I don't think most of them like it when I say, yeah, what's the point? What's the point in archaeology?
I almost want to know, like, are there, like, common answers when people ask that question? Because my guess, and I would love to know right or wrong, is that archaeology in general, unless you're teaching a class, like if you're just an archaeologist and not a professor of archaeology, you have to justify your project. You have to justify your budget. You have to justify the amount of money somebody is giving you. And that's what the point is, right? Like, whatever answer you give to what's the point is also the same answer for why you should give me this money.
Like, I'll put an addendum, yes, and also if you're a professor, you have to, you have to say that as well, because the thing is, one of the most difficult things to do at the moment, and if you, like, on Archaeology Twitter, yes, Archaeology Twitter exists, and we all know each other, and it's really, really weird, because when you bump into people, they're like, oh, what's your name? And you're like, oh, I don't recognize that. What's your Twitter handle? I know you. So that's literally, like, I swear I've been to conferences where people recognize me by my Twitter handle more than my name. So it happens. But
Tristan, I'm right there with you. I've announced that I'm Jason on this show and others.
You're not.
No,
you're Palmer.
Yeah.
I'm never going to accept Jason. I mean, like, cool. I respect you. You're totally valid. But no, you're Agent Palmer. I don't know. Jason. Is there a lot of Jasons? No.
I mean, there are a few. I have a best friend named Jason. There's Jason the Angry Ginger.
Yes, that's who I was thinking of. I was like, holy shit.
There are
too many of them.
I actually know 7 Jasons, not counting myself.
Ooh.
And not like I know them, like I've met and hung out with. So yeah, there's a lot of us. I don't know how that worked out.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite. I've met a few Tristans. Not in archaeology. Actually, wait, no, I'll tell a lie. I definitely know another Tristan in archaeology. But reversing back to your question,
yeah,
I think archaeology sometimes has a bit of an image-ish problem, and there are questions and very healthy discussions as to how archaeology is justified, because I've kind of talked about this on my podcast before, and I realize sometimes I talk about it in a very abstract sense, but that the choices that we make in terms of justifying what history we're wanting to do, we're almost prioritizing the preservation of some history over other history. And for me, that's a bit of a problem. Because these choices that we make, that, oh, well, look, this is really important because it's going to decay really quickly. Well, oh, maybe that's not as important. We kind of give different levels of priority to things, and we can never stop the inevitable decay of all things. Everything will decompose, everything will decay to some extent, right? Our choices are only what we preserve and to what level. And for the last, I'd say, 100 years, those decisions, whether like they're decisions that were meant in a certain way or not, they have kind of reinforced the way 20th century people saw the world, where they saw certain races as like more important and superior to others, and other people just, like naturally not as intelligent. And instead of really saying, actually, there's a lot of history that we're missing because it was overlooked, because it was seen as not important enough to be prioritized, we should actually be starting to look to that hidden history, that history that was overlooked before, and actually start working with that and trying to find a way of digging that up and experiencing that and bringing that to the world.
I guess, doesn't that also lead you back to the problem of we can't record everything?
True, but we can make decisions about what we record, and this is the thing. It's like, well, my only thing is, well, okay, why are you recording this? Oh, well, it's because it's it's important. We've this is important stuff, but at the same time, people say that because almost like they're used to it. Like there's stuff you're used to that you think is important because you've heard a lot about it, and there's a lot of money in it because people like to hear about it, and it's almost like this big circle. So like for me, this is where I put on my anarchaeologist hat, and I say, look, I don't care about Vikings, I don't care about Romans, I don't care about ancient Egyptians, I don't care about like what the Victorians did for us. Give me something good. Give me the archaeology of brushing teeth. And no joke. I was at a conference in September, and somebody said, I reeled this off to them, because it's like one of my things. Oh, the archaeology of brushing teeth, no one's interested in that. And she said to me, oh, wait a minute, Tristan, I actually know somebody who's done about the archaeology of brushing teeth. And I was like, no way! So that was amazing for me. That was validation. But the reason why I say it's kind of important to think about the archaeology of brushing teeth, I don't know, actually, Jason, I'll pass this one to you. Why do you think, A, the archaeology of brushing teeth is important, and B, why do you think people haven't been interested in it?
Well, I think A and B are probably the same answer, because everyone does it. So because it's universal, it's international, it's regardless of race or gender or creed, everybody there's always dental care. And I mean, it's just a thing, like it's a constant, like drinking water, so nobody's going to go back and be like, why are we drinking water? I feel like that because everybody does it, because it's so like ambiguous, that's why A and B.
So one of the things that archaeologists might use in terms of, like, for example, find out the age of a skeleton, is to look at tooth wear analysis. Now, tooth wear analysis shows us principally things like teeth like that have been chewing lots of hard fibrous materials, or it can show us like the cavities, abscesses, but it can give us sometimes the rough age of a person. Especially with how children's teeth erupt in different sets, you know? And what my question was to a tooth researcher was basically, now that people more regularly brush with things like fluoride-based stuff, you know, will archaeologists in the future have a problem aging people's teeth? Will it present an issue when we're looking at diets of the 21st century? And, you know, like finding out like what people's teeth are like. I think, you know, for example, you know, the British, you know, the stereotype that I still don't understand of British people with bad teeth. You know, I'm fascinated by the idea that like some future archaeologist goes to America and like finds that everybody has all these like veneers and like pristine white teeth, and like tries to make up a like some sort of ritualistic kind of like interpretation of, oh well, they all just they prayed to the smile god, and they thought teeth were a sign of you know, wealth and good health, and only the men with great teeth could get a woman, and all this, you know.
Look, listen, I watch my fair share of panel shows because the UK has them and we don't. And there's a lot of good teeth on British panel shows. So I mean, unless like everybody with bad teeth is not allowed to be a celebrity or on TV, like there's clearly that is a misnomer. Like it's just
there's definitely obviously a class element to it and a wealth element to it. I will say that, you know, there's very few people who would be well known as celebrities who have bad teeth. There are a couple.
That begs almost another question, which is, if I presume that there are very few I don't want to say poor archaeologists, but if you don't have money, it's very hard to do. Or if you don't have funding, it's pretty hard to do. So what does the class system say about prioritizing? Because that's basically where you're getting your money, right?
So I for the last 5 years have sat on the Scottish group of the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists. So the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists is basically a body that seeks to kind of create a code of conduct for archaeologists, but broadly kind of like looks kind of into archaeologists as professionals. So I'm going to put on my my kind of like archaeology workforce hat and say that archaeology still is one of the most poorly paid jobs that requires a degree. And this is one of the problems that we are having, is that people are often chased away from archaeology as a career because the conditions are very difficult. So like when I was an archaeologist for 3 months before I realized, look, I cannot, that was a commercial archaeologist. I cannot live like this. So like, you were kind of expected to kind of phone up on the Friday to see if you had work on the Monday. You'd be given a week, or you'd be given 3 weeks here, and you had to kind of like be prepared to travel, different parts of the country and build up some experience, hopping about the place. And then maybe after a year, somebody might give you a permanent contract. So it's really uncertain. There's not really a lot of job security when you start out, and it means that it's quite difficult to work and live and be stable as an archaeologist. I remember meeting somebody who said to me, like, they were 35, all their friends had houses and families, and they were the only one who couldn't get a mortgage because the way they were digging, they had temporary job after temporary job, and they loved doing it, and that's why they kept doing it, but it had its sacrifices. And I wish archaeology didn't impose such sacrifices on people. I wish it was a bit better.
All right, so I'm going to ask the question that I'm not trying to be insensitive, right? But the other digging in dirt, quote unquote, profession is paleontology.
Yeah.
And I'm very aware that you do not mix the two. But I mean, is this a scenario where it's kind of similar, where I can't imagine paleontologists have it any better early on? And is there any like camaraderie that you guys as professionals have? Because like, if you're not teaching, it's not an easy road.
I think I think archaeologists have solidarity with a lot of workers, and there's actually a move to properly unionize a lot of working archaeologists. That's kind of growing. There's a sentiment that there's needs for much better working conditions overall. And it's not just pay. I think it's also to do with the working conditions, how much you're out on site, how much travel you're doing, etc., etc. And I would say that if there's any paleontologists out there who are suffering or like having to deal with the same issues, I think there's definitely room for solidarity under that umbrella. I definitely think so. But I think also, even teaching is difficult. I remember reading a paper that said, although universities largely say that you do 40% of your time is teaching, 40% of your time is research, and 20% is admin, that in fact the admin is about 35%, and so you have to cut into the percentages of time for your other stuff to try and make up for it. But of course you can't reduce the amount of time that people are in classes for, so then your research suffers. So actually, if you're an academic, it's tough. And that's because, universities and research facilities now are being run as businesses. Archaeology companies are being, run very strictly like businesses, to the point and the detriment of their workers. And I think that's a terrible thing, and I think that should improve. I think conditions need to improve.
Was there ever a golden age for archaeology, like where maybe conditions have always been conditions, right? But like where it was, I don't know, where there was more money in it, maybe not to be earned, but to fund digs, or where interest was more. I mean, I don't know, like I know you, right? And yeah, occasionally I read some history books, but I don't hear about it like ever.
Nope. And you won't unless you're in the industry. I mean, this is the same for other industries as well. But archaeologists, I hate to say it, but if an archaeologist gets an interpretation of an archaeological site is wrong, nobody dies. However, if the surgeon gets something wrong, that can injure somebody. You know what I mean? So because of that difference in what they do, sometimes there's this idea that, oh, well, it's not worth our time to think about. However, the thing is, archaeology is very young as a commercial enterprise. The first archaeology units in the UK, that's archaeology companies, only go far as back as the 90s. So they're really not that old.
So was it other countries doing it, or was it like individual enterprises doing it? Like, I mean, obviously there was digging happening before. I mean, whatever that, but what were those then?
So commercial units started in the 90s. Some of them formed out of the back of university organizations who were doing the digging for research purposes. However, what happened was the planning laws were amended to say that if you're doing new development, you have to do an archaeological survey to protect heritage. And from that, the more and more development was happening that universities, they couldn't keep up with their research. So archaeological companies were created in order to do this development work. And it's almost like they're kind of like parallel to the construction industry, because the construction industry relies on them going out, surveying, digging up anything important, and then, then it can be held and maybe then interpreted later on.
What I mean, I guess so. You're in the UK. You've been around a lot longer as a civilization than I have here in America. But we don't. I don't really think we've got that here to that extent, unless you're in a specific spot in the States.
Well, I think what always fascinates me about the United States is the amount of archaeology that people don't recognize is archaeology. So I know that if you're in the West...
Look, we're famous for our ignorance, okay?
Yes, no, most certainly. And let's be clear. America has history stretching back at least, if not more, than 14,000 years. And it's probably even further back than that. And the difference is that in America, a lot of people who lived there before the Europeans came over, they created they created mounds. For example, there's a lot of an American Midwest had a lot of mounds built in it. These kind of like hilly kind of structures, sometimes in the shape of different animals and stuff like that. It's really interesting to look up. So there's a lot of history and evidence that, like, for example, trees were used as marking posts and were monuments in of themselves. And obviously some trees live for a very long time, others don't. They get chopped down. There's a lot of kind of like history in America before the Europeans arrived that a lot of people just don't know exists because it doesn't take the same form as it does in Europe, for example. In the west of America, you can be walking on the desert and you can literally find like sites just on the top of the desert. You can find like piles of like rock flakes from where somebody's trying to make stone tools. You can find lots of different pieces of information there, but it's not in the way that you would think in Europe. What you find, like we find Roman roads, we find like Neolithic pottery and stuff like that. It's just very different, but it's definitely there. And I think a lot of Americans, not to put anything on you, Jason, but a lot of Americans feel as if like America wasn't really much of anything before the Europeans arrived.
Well, there's that Eurocentric view of history is what was in our textbooks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're Native Americans. Although, to be fair, I don't know what they're called anymore. Whatever the politically correct police are.
I think Native Americans is fine.
But to be fair, in my textbooks in like middle and high school, they were Indians.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't learn about them except to say that, you know, we traded them beads for New York. Like, it was very, they were walk-on roles, despite the fact that they were here first. They were walk-on roles in the movie only when white man showed up. I mean, that's basically the way it was in our textbooks. And so I don't think it's being amended. Like, I don't know. Like, history books, I mean, I guess I don't know if this is an archaeology thing, but like, how often do textbooks get rewritten? Like history books.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So like that has colored my view, I guess, so to speak. So I don't read a lot about, I read a lot of history books, right? And a lot of it's modern history. I've been digging a lot into technology, but you know, I read, the last history book I read was The Source by James Michener. And I read that like a decade ago, I feel like. And that was not from my own backyard. That's a tell over somewhere in the Middle East. So I haven't even done a good job of correcting my ill-informed old history books.
Mm-hmm. I think the thing is that though the choices that were made when it came to those textbooks were actually political ones and social ones. I think America right now is going through a very weird tantrum, I think, politically. And like America's not alone, because the UK is doing it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be the first. I mean, I did want to ask you this, and this is we'll pause right here. So here's the question. Yeah. Is there another time in history where two major powers were having crises at the same time? And obviously, these crises are not quite related. They're kind of on their own. But like, has that ever happened? Like, was there ever anything in like one of the old Chinese dynasties at the same time as like there was Rome was burning? Like, is that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, all the time.
Okay.
Like, I mean, if you look at history, you'll be surprised at how often things crumble and things fall. I mean, the thing is, the famous one is obviously the fall of the Roman Empire, which, to be absolutely honest, is like a number of different social and economic policies that the Roman state took. And it's actually rather boring in a sense, because it's not this kind of like one last final stand battle where the whole place was brought to ruin. It was more like a slow drip drab of like bad decisions, repercussions. And I mean, the thing is, the East Roman Empire continued on after the Western Roman Empire had fallen. Like, it wasn't as if like the whole of the Roman Empire dissolved. I mean, it stretched from all the way in Spain, all the way over through Italy, all the way to like Bulgaria. Like, it was really, really big. And this is the thing, is that like when you start asking people about the Romans in, for example, I was speaking to a researcher at the conference there, and she was telling me about Romans in the Balkan states. For your listeners, that's places like south of Ukraine and like kind of on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. So if you look up at the map, edge of the Mediterranean Sea, the Balkan states are like, Bulgaria, Romania, those kind of places, Hungary, etc. Although I don't know if any Hungarians will be actually offended at that. I mean, that kind of general area of Europe. But not a lot of people think Roman history's there, but actually there were massive cities there, and obviously Constantinople was a very important city in the past. There's so much that people can simplify, because I think one of the issues that the US and the UK are having at the moment is a realization that the belief that their power and their might and their wealth is like just and, you know, earned through honest means is actually a fallacy. You know, there's a lot of power and strength and bloodshed that happened that made those countries the way they are. And coming to terms with that is very, very difficult. And that's why I think history presents now a chance for people to reflect in a deep time kind of way, and for people to kind of see the future out of not making the same mistakes as the mistakes made in the past. I think that's one of the really important takes here. I mean, the thing is, if America was illegitimate in its inception because it was based on the genocide of Native American peoples and it was based off slavery, if it's illegitimate, should it not exist? And if it doesn't exist, where do all the Americans go? It's a really, then you have to ask, well, if it then should exist, in what form should it exist? And it's the same for the UK.
Well, I guess the bigger follow-up question is, number one, we have to do the research. I mean, and that's a big assumption, right? But number two is we have to tell the story. Mm-hmm. But you can't just tell the story to me. Like, we have to tell the story. Like, how... I mean, I guess that's the big, question mark in the room is, how do you get the story out there? I mean, you're involved in a podcast network, but, I mean, do we need to go bigger? Like, is this a thing where, somebody's got to get some money and throw it at Hollywood? Like, we need to tell these stories. Like, how do we get these stories out there to the masses almost?
I think when I started my podcasting journey and when I started actually my general archaeology journey, I kind of saw a very narrow definition of what I thought was the only way forward. I thought we had to be very, very kind of caustic, very kind of reactionary, and very kind of ready to take down people who got it wrong. And now I've kind of matured in my stance because I feel as if you could never tackle something with just one approach. There needs to be a number of different approaches that should be made. There's space for everyone. One of the really important things I think in history and the past is that we start including more people. We don't say oh, you can't talk about the past because you don't know enough. Well, they can learn enough. You don't know, you can't speak about the past because this, that, and the other. And obviously there's issues with that, and I'm more than happy to discuss that. But as a general point, for me, if we want to really make history more accessible and people getting excited about it and learning about it properly, we have to include them. That's really it. We have to include other people in the conversation. We can't be hidden away. We can't be talking amongst ourselves. We have to be doing it. And that's why I wanted to make a podcast. And that's why when Chris Webster, who does the CRM Archaeology podcast, kind of put a call out to make a network, I was ready to answer that call. Because for me, it's about connecting people to that information and getting them excited and having other people go, hey, well, they're involved and they're not some ivory tower elite. Maybe I can have my say as well. And that's what I think we need to be heading towards.
All right, so I want to turn this completely positive. So, Tristan, you are probably, much more historically well-rounded than I am. So, could you tell me one interesting, positive story of or one of your favorite stories of something you've learned in your archaeological journey?
Whew. This is a difficult one because I obviously want to be positive with this, but it's going to have to take a little mix of some negativity as well. So can I prepare this complex answer?
Sure.
I'll make it nice. I'll round it off.
Okay.
So I heard about somebody doing research a couple of years ago. I think this is back in 2014, 2015. Now, I started my podcast in 2014, and I had a chance then, like before I was doing my archaeology podcast, I didn't feel like I could talk to other archaeologists because I was just fresh out of university. I hadn't really done a lot of my own unique research. I wasn't important, but having the podcast meant I could go up to people and be like, oh, well, I've got a podcast. Do you want to talk to me about your research? And start a conversation. One of my favorite episodes that I've ever done was with somebody called Theresa O'Mahony. Now, Theresa started doing archaeology later on in life. And she started her degree, I think, in her 50s. And one of the really special things about Theresa was that she was really, really, committed to making archaeology better. Because she had disabilities through her life, and some of them were physical disabilities. And one of the things that she noticed was that when she was applying to field schools to get, so field schools are where you pay to go on a dig, as part of, when you're a student to kind of, get experience so that when you leave your studies you can get a job. She noticed that not very many of them were accepting her. Now, in her class, those same field schools would accept her classmates at a much higher rate. And she spoke to some other people who were in the similar position to her, who might have certain disabilities, and basically they were told that they were a liability to these organizations who did field schools, and that the insurance wouldn't cover them. Now, she then began to kind of figure out that in archaeology, being disabled was a big problem. It was a barrier. It was a huge barrier. And she actually started dedicating her research that she would then eventually do in trying to figure out how bad the problem was. And, she has stories of people being turned away from job interviews, being told, why are you even here? And she was determined out of that to create guidelines that would help employers. She was determined to change people's attitudes towards disabled people. And her goal was to make archaeology a shining beacon of what an industry can do by being more accepting, because there were so many good, hard-working people who were being denied work because the employer had prejudged them, without having seen them work. And that was the key point. It wasn't based on what performance they had. It was just this idea that the employer had that, I don't know if I could deal with this. So I spoke to her on that podcast, and I had the opportunity to then meet her at a conference, and she was absolutely lovely and amazing, and just such an honest person who saw the podcast as just this amazing thing. She was so on board. She was saying to me, look, as soon as I get the a foundation I want to start ready, I want you to train up people to make podcasts and stuff. I want you to be helping out. And I was totally up for that. So I'm still am. So she was been doing this, and she'd done her master's, and she was about to start her PhD, and unfortunately she fell ill. And it was just last month that she passed away. And I think a lot of us in archaeology who knew her, especially in public archaeology, which is kind of where I place myself as public archaeology, we were shocked and we were deeply saddened by her passing. But when I was talking to people about her, it was the resolve that people had to continue on her work and her legacy that like filled me with such joy. It was amazing, just like the amount of people who were just ready to fight in the same way she did. You know, like she would, you know, talk truth to power. She was there every single time, a relentless font of energy, ready to help out when even she was like feeling bad. She was feeling ill. She was ready to do stuff to help other people. And I was so moved by the way people talked about her and what they said about her. And for me, if there's anything positive about archaeology, it's the fact that there are people like Theresa out there who are ready to shake things up, to make a difference, and to do the right thing. And in so doing, like, spur on everyone else to do it as well. And yeah, and that's kind of like, that's the joy that I see out of the darkness.
That's a beautiful story, number one. And number two, it leads me to a question, which is the key to our... I guess it's probably always been this way, but I'm going to ask you anyway, because I feel like there's got to be a better way, more eloquent way of saying it. And if nothing else, you can just say it, because with your accent, it'll sound better. Is the key to our future the past? Like, I feel like now more than ever, that statement's true.
I think one of the things I'm writing at the moment in terms of podcasts is I'm trying to kind of get a few ideas together where I think it's difficult to think about the past without comparing it to the present. And it's difficult to think about the future without comparing it to the past. And I was having this discussion with somebody about, I don't know if you're very familiar with the arguments of free will, whether it's deterministic, or something else, or fatalist, or, compatibilist. There's lots of different terms for either, the world can only exist, the reality can only happen in one way, kind of thing, or do we actually choose to do stuff, etc., etc., etc. But I think when we talk about history, it's so impossible to talk about history without talking about the future, and vice versa, that we almost live in this middle state between past and future. So, like, the past represents to us as a society, like, our early childhood, and the future is the embodiment of things that could be. When you lose a sense of concept of what the future could be, you lose your way, I think for me, in my darkest times, when I've really suffered and been in a kind of state where I couldn't go on, it's because I didn't know the future, I was incredibly sick last year. I was in hospital, and for a while, I went to a very bad place mentally. My body was breaking down at that point. I had lots of problems. And one of the things was there was no prognosis date that they had. My doctor, I think quite rightly, kept the recovery time a secret to me because he kind of felt that I could possibly heal quicker. But he didn't want to give me false hope or lie to me. So he just didn't say it. But because I wasn't sure how long I would suffer for, I felt like I had no future. There was 1 week where every single day something else went wrong. And it went so wrong I had to go back into the operating theatre several times. So at that point my future was like nothing. I was just living every day in agony. And that I went to a really bad place. And I think what society is now experiencing is this lack of a future. This lack of, well, what's going to happen? Every single year we seem to be faced with like things we had no knowledge of happening. We're stuck thinking, well, what could go worse? And then something worse presents itself. And that's really confusing for us as both individuals and society. And so I think we have to be careful not to lean back on history in such a way that all we do is look behind us. We do have to look forward, but we have to be novel and new in the ways in which we can imagine the future. As much as the game Fallout is really good fun, I don't think I would want to live in a Fallout world. Or Dune. Isn't Dune set in the future? Oh God, I hope it is. But I mean that kind of, or Waterworld. That's another one. I mean, do we really want to see the end of the world happen? Or what's the alternative?
I think the other scary part is, while we have these fantastical Fallout and Waterworld, but I think the reality is never going to be that pretty. The reality is, if there's an apocalypse, I mean,
we're not going to survive.
We're not. Yeah, there's not going to be an us really on the other side to have the water world. I mean, there's only probably. I like to compare everything to Avengers at this point, so I just imagine that where Doctor Strange is like, I looked at all these billions of ideas and there's only one in which we win. It's probably true that there's only one in which an apocalypse happens and we somehow manage to survive, but this isn't science fiction. This isn't comic books. There's very little chance. There's even less of a chance mathematically that 1% of our survival actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think there's a validation in looking back and looking at the present and keeping an eye to the future and on the horizon, which it's hard to look in three directions, but all you have to do is move your head. You just can't be tunnel vision. You can't always look at the present. You can't always look at history, and you can't always look at the future because you don't get the whole picture that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, the thing is, like, each in our own lives, we have faced this issue as well, because I know that I think back to conversations I have that, I mean, I wish I hadn't said things, and I wish I hadn't done things. And, you know, I sometimes, even though I love presenting podcasts, I sound really friendly and cheery, I actually sometimes say the wrong thing a lot of the time. I have been known to insult people and then have to work to win their trust back. I've had to do that quite a few times because, yeah, I say the wrong thing, and I then think about it, and it like takes over. It's kind of like, I don't really, I don't know. It's difficult. I mean, Jason, is there ever a time where you kind of like think back to like a time when you said something and you were like, oh, I really shouldn't have said that, and just keeps coming back?
You know, yeah, yes and no. It's changed. And I won't say it's changed since I started this podcast. It's changed since I was on podcasts in general, because what I find myself doing is thinking more about what I didn't say.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's the difference between, okay, I have something recorded and out there versus I don't have something recorded and out there, so I can think about all the things I said that were wrong, or like, I can't believe I did that, versus now where it's like, I didn't follow up that question, or I didn't answer this question properly. Now it's more the things that I left unsaid. And I don't know if it's kind of two sides of the same coin, right? Like, thinking about the things that you didn't say is no better or worse than thinking about the things you did say.
Yeah,
I'm still living back there in the past. Like I got to get my eyes front, basically.
Yeah. No, but I think this is a very normal human thing to do. And I don't necessarily think, I think you said it best when you said, you can't be focused one way or another. I think it's very easy for us to kind of challenge ourselves sometimes and, fight ourselves in a very destructive way. I'm very self-critical, but in a destructive way, not in a good way. And there's some places in which I wish I was a bit more critical of myself that would actually end up doing some positive stuff instead of this kind of after the fact, oh, I shouldn't have said that or done that, or I maybe I should have approached this situation in a different way. With podcasts, actually, I actually listen back, and some of them I'm actually still happy with, which is great. Which I think is great. I actually, what did I listen to recently? I know it's terrible to listen to yourself, but I don't know if you ever remember the Stranger Conversations.
I mean, I will tell you and the listeners that I happen to have season 1 on my hard drive.
Amazing.
I also have the few episodes of season 2 that I guess technically I was a part of all 3 of season 2, right? Because there was the one with Chris Maier that did air on the How Was Your Week Honey feed, and then I did the one with Tristan. But yeah, I mean, I don't go back often, but I think I listened to. I've listened to my friends more than strangers, right? Like, I think I've listened to Bill's episode a couple times. I think I've listened to Heno's episode a couple. I've listened to yours. I have gone back and listened to yours.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of my that is one of my strongest podcasting memories. Is that I think that's one of my strongest memories. That really, just every time I think about it, it's just positive vibes. It's really good, and I think that was one of the best things I ever did in terms of podcasts. That was definitely one of those things, and I did listen to it more recently. And I'm pretty sure I still stand by everything I said in that, which I'm really happy for, because I think Grant is a really good questioner. I think that was really, really one of the key things. And that's what I like about certain podcasts is I think certain podcasts are made good by good questions. Because I actually suck if it's just me. I really do. I love asking questions. But if it's just me doing a monologue, I'm not as good. I don't, it's not me, all my good episodes are with people.
I'll tell you this little secret that I've done with some people, and I won't say who they know who they are. I've been the audience, the silent majority, so that some of my friends didn't have to record alone, even though the end product was a monologue.
So good.
Because
I might get you to do that.
It makes such a difference. I mean, people don't. It seems like, what would it make a difference? You're not saying anything, you're not adding anything to the conversation. But the fact that somebody can see me on screen and they're talking to me, it doesn't matter if they're reading it or they have a loose outline. They're talking to someone, and even if because usually the way that works is they can hear me. So, number one, I can be a producer and I can say, you want to redo that line? Or number two, I can just say, yeah. Or the quintessential television, we aren't hearing anything but the other side, which is just yeah, even just doing that helps the person who's talking to no one, as the course of a monologue is, just understand that no, they're talking to, because sometimes it's just easier not to visualize the audience, to just have one. And I've been that, and it's super helpful for some people. Not everybody needs it. I don't need it necessarily when I do my intros and outros, But that's because I don't need people hearing all my outtakes. Like those aren't one take. Like, I'm not one take Charlie. Like, come on, that's So it's what it is. And I mean, listen, we started a little bit talking about our history, and I mean, you and I wish I had all the episodes because I don't. But you and I worked on a short-lived show where Diamond Dave wrote, and I edited, and then you narrated the Chronicles Unwritten. And
so good.
I want to tell you that as an international, starting in Canada, edited in America, and then recorded in the UK, like it was a sight to behold. That like I've still never met any of you.
Yeah.
But that we put that together,
so good.
That was amazing. And I was privy to some of your outtakes.
Oh no!
and
yes.
and it was.
God, I remember it.
And one of the things that I learned and I tried to help out with was like towards the end for the last 2 or 3 episodes, I tried to edit with you in mind. Because there were occasionally some words that would trip you up, so I would edit them out of Dave's drafts so that you wouldn't have to have trouble with this word or be like, all right, this alliteration is not going to go well. We're going to edit one of these words to make this simpler for Tristan to make it easier for him. But it's just one of those things you have to do. Is that why
it felt like it got easier? I thought I was just getting better at it, but no.
No,
it was being edited.
I put the training wheels back on for you, buddy.
Oh, no. I didn't get better.
I think it was probably a little bit of both. I don't think...
Yeah,
I think I While I do feel slightly bad for breaking Tristan's heart at the end there, I thought I was doing the right thing at the time, making it easier for him. So for that, Tristan, I apologize. But for this conversation that we had, where it went and where it didn't, let me just say, listening back, I may have said the thesis statement, the takeaway for the episode on making sure we look in 3 directions, keeping our eyes on the past, the present, and the future. But it was only because the conversation with Tristan led me there. And it's an important thing to note. Many people are fascinated with 1 or 2 of the 3 times, the past, the present, or the future. Some are absolutely frightened by 1 or more of them too, but the concept of keeping an eye on all 3 is no different than the moderation that is discussed in things such as episode 4 of this podcast with Margot regarding diet, fitness, or self-care. I also believe that having these kinds of conversations is important to a well-rounded education, because healthy debate usually leads to more questions than answers, which means the continuing education actually continues, and because the discourse of a lively debate is not always linear, the continuing education can and will go in many different directions. I, for one, am now going to take a look at my reading list and be sure to add some of the history books beyond the volumes I have on the history of technologies. In full disclosure, one of the working titles for this podcast before it was launched was The Continuing Education of Agent Palmer. And while I'm happy with the Palmer Files and the description I use for the show on most major podcast apps, continuing education still fits as a pillar of what I want to accomplish. Because if this podcast is listened to, then the goal would be to educate or inform one of the 3 parties involved, either myself, the host, my guest, or you, the listener. Some weeks are more obvious and academic in nature, but not all of them will be like that. And as the podcast is still in its infancy, part of that education for me is in doing the podcast. So, did you learn anything on this week's episode? Tweet or email the show and let me know. Thanks for listening to the Palmer Files, episode 5. As a reminder, all links are available in the show notes. And now for some more official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the conversation. Let me hear what you think. You can tweet the show at the Palmer Files. You can tweet myself at Agent Palmer. And you can tweet this week's guest, Tristan Boyle, at An Archaeologist. The show email is thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. And don't forget to visit Tristan's podcast network at archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and see what I've got going on at agentpalmer.com. You can also hear more of me in the meantime on Our Liner Notes, a musical conversation podcast with host Chris Maier, and as co-host of the Podcast Digest with Dan Lizette. So Tristan, do you have one final question for me?
Yes, I do. I do, in fact. After all the years of being around podcasters, doing podcasts, editing other people's podcasts, editing other people's shows, editing scripts for other people's shows, helping out on all the behind the scenes things, how does it feel to now be doing the podcast and be the presenter of it? Have you always wanted to be the presenter of a podcast? Or do you feel like this is something you've kind of almost had to do because that's what everybody does? How do you feel about that?
I won't say I had to do it, but I will say it's a scenario where it was a confluence of a lot of things. I spent 2 years thinking about doing a podcast. So first I needed to figure out what I was going to do. I think all of the things you just mentioned of the things I did made it easier to do. I'm not afraid of the mic, I'm not afraid of editing, and I'm not afraid to reach out and book guests because I've done that for other people. What it really boiled down to was for a short time on my blog, I was doing interrogations, which were Q&As, which is the only way you can really have a conversation in text form. And they're not necessarily fulfilling. I'm not unhappy with them, but there's only so much you can do. I'm not going to email you back and forth, Tristan, 100 times and edit the whole thing together and put it on my blog. Having a conversation was going to be better. And I didn't have, I can blame a few people if I really wanted to, but I was meeting more people and I was meeting authors and, telling people that I was involved in podcasting. And then the follow-up was always, but I don't have a show to put you on. None of the shows I was involved with were for an author. It's not a slight on anyone, but all of the people whose podcasts I was working on, they don't have time to read a book and then have an author on. So I can read your book and write the review on my blog, but you're not going to be able to be on a podcast. And I haven't had an author on yet, but there's going to be authors on this show. And that's a big reason. One of the big reasons why is I want to talk to these authors about the books they've written. And I want to know what else they're reading, and their influences. But I didn't have a platform for them. And now I do. And I have a platform for other people. I have a platform for you. And I have so I can have these conversations. And anybody who's familiar with the back catalog of the Proxycast, as it were, a lot of those were fun shows. I didn't really do a lot of serious discussion. And that's really what I wanted this to be. And it was always going to be easier to start my own show than to convince somebody else. Do you mind doing a serious conversation and dropping the humor altogether? I'm not saying you can't have a good time, but can we not with the dick and fart jokes? So it was just going to be easier. And thinking about it for 2 years and helping everybody with all their stuff, you start to tick boxes. This is what I want to do. This is what I don't want to do. and the idea of the show gets narrower until I have a show. I hope this answered your question.
But it's really interesting that you're saying this, because it's quite a similar reason as to why I started podcasting when I was 16 years old. I've technically been podcasting for 12 years.
Brag about it. Oh. Fine.
Oh. No. It's you know what? I had some hiatuses in the middle, but it was 2014 when I started the Archaeologist podcast, which now has become the Modern Myth podcast. I'm inserting the names so that you can go and find it. So anyway, what was I going to say?
Oh, it's all going to be in the show notes.
Yeah, I know, but I like saying it as well. It's my show. What was I going to... Yeah, so when I was in... It was 2014. I just finished my degree in archaeology with chemistry, and I was like, right, I need a radical, like, really kind of crazy archaeology podcast that isn't scared to ask really difficult questions and confront difficult history. And, like, I'm looking through them all, and they're all like... And this is what happened in Rome in Britain. And this is Archaeology, Indiana Jones. And I'm like, oh my God, it was so bad. So I had to make my own. And I had done a lot of podcasts beforehand. And I think I had to make it. There was no choice in it. I had to make it. And that's what I feel is like so important about podcasting, is you almost have to feel like you have to make it. Like there's a relentless energy behind it. And I think that's it was always inevitable, Jason. Always inevitable. Always. Doomed to podcast.